Malcolm Gladwell, in his book The Outliers, said that you need 10,000 hours to become an expert. And the impression that he gave in his book was that anybody applying themselves to anything for 10,000 hours would become an expert at that thing. Now, if you work back the amount of hours, the 10,000 hours, that's approximately 10 years. It's a decade of practice. Now, the chap that I spoke about previously, Steve Fallon, who remembered more numbers than any person in the world had ever done, did that in 3 years. So it didn't take him 10 years to learn how to do that skill. When you look at a concert pianist, somebody who is at the top of their game, I'm almost convinced that nobody in this group listens to classical music. So I can't name a piano grandmaster off the top of my head because I don't listen to these guys. There is a guy called Jordan Rudders that I listen to he is phenomenal, but he plays piano in Dream Theater with John Petrucci. So the stuff is quite heavy, and he's done some solo recordings that are amazing. Irrespective, what they're saying is 10 years of practice will get a concert pianist to the place where they are very good. Let me rephrase that. Not a concert pianist. 10 years of practice will take an ordinary person learning how to become a pianist to the point of being exceptional. Concert pianists are 30 years of age normally. So you're looking at somebody who starts playing the piano when they're 8, 6, 7, 8 years old, and by the time they get to 30, that's when they're on stage and playing with symphonies and leading the symphonies and recording and all of that kind of stuff. So that's way in excess of 10 years. They say that writers and authors, and the example that he quotes in his book, he says people who write scientific papers, usually it takes from their first publication 10 years for them to produce their best publication. 10 years. Now, how much time goes into somebody who is writing a degree or doing a dissertation or whatever it is to publish their first work? So that's from when they first get published. And then another example is people who write books. Obviously, the circumstances surrounding someone who becomes a successful author it's like becoming a successful musician. How do you, it's possibly one of the hardest things in the world, is how do you transform your art? How do you transform your creativity into something that generates an income for you? That is an exceptionally hard thing to do. You ask any musician who plays music, and there's such a huge thing nowadays with streaming, with the music streaming apps, with YouTube, with people generating their own popularity and creating their own fan base and doing their own thing, and not going the route of record labels and finding their own popularity. But nevertheless, somebody who writes, how much writing does it take to become an author? That's a bad way of putting it. To start being competent at your skill, and then to become famous and to start making a living off of your skill. I know in his book, Malcolm Gladwell estimated that the Beatles had done 10,000 hours playing in Hamburg in Germany, which allowed them to generate the skill that they needed to take their particular style and their particular brand of music to the masses. People have gone out since and really worked it out, and they're looking at about 1,800 hours that they spent playing at these gigs, not 10,000 hours. Now, there's a lot to be said for spending 1,800 hours, maybe 2 years of practice, 1,800 hours in a band with 4 or 5 people playing together and playing songs together and going out and doing shows every night for hours on end. There is a lot to be said for what that is going to do for your level of skill. But is that what projected the Beatles to the heights that they attained? Because that's what he was claiming in his book, and what Anders Ericsson is saying is that that's not necessarily so, because there's also the combination of John Lennon and Paul McCartney and their songwriting abilities. Now, there's a TV series that came out just recently, a couple of years now, done by Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters, where he goes to all the different studios. He recorded all of the tracks on his one particular album at a very famous recording studio. And in part of the documentary series, he talks about his songwriting and that he practices songwriting, and that he's been practicing songwriting for many, many, many years. He sits one side, he puts time aside and sits and writes and practices songwriting. Now, I think this can apply to any, and I think that's what the purpose of writing his book is. There's certain systems and there's certain structures in place. So one of the things that we'll go into is the violin. People have been playing the violin for 1,000 years, hundreds of years. The teaching methods have become very standardized. The way to learn has become very standardized. Recovery is very much the same. There's a lot of structures in the recovery process that you can use, that are there, that are available to you as a resource to stay sober, which is very, very important. Is that specifically what the point of this talk is about? Not necessarily. But I think that there's a very close correlation with that. So let's talk about the violin, because that's kind of where we are now in the talk. And the idea is to understand what separates the good from the best. There's a huge correlation, I think, in what you're talking about, and I think it's something that people don't think about and don't talk about and don't look at, is how much effort actually goes into somebody's recovery. How much work do they actually put in? How many meetings do they go to? How many people do they listen to? How much do they consult with other people to find out where they're going wrong? The ideas of recovery are not new ideas. If the object of the exercise, which I believe the object of the exercise is to find wholeness, then how do you do that? There's a book that I read called A Course in Miracles. Course in Miracles, it took me 4.5 years to read the book. It's very thick, it's written on onion paper, and the language is ridiculous. Eckhart Tolle's book there, the Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle's book is the baby version of A Course in Miracles. It is so complicated. And I worked my way through this book. It was like chewing on a toilet roll. That's how much fun it was. You know, I really just had to work my way through and work my way through and work my way through. The information was so valuable, and the information benefited me so much in my quest to find wholeness and to try and find understanding and to try and find my center, my balance, that I persisted with the quest. So from an early point in my recovery, my central goal was to find. Now, anybody here who has taken LSD will know that they talk about it being a mind-expanding drug. Even if you haven't taken LSD, I'm sure that you've heard, expand your mind when you take these kind of drugs. What I believe happens when you take these kind of drugs is you open up a door that you can't close again. So this is my experience. I opened a door that I couldn't close. So my quest has been to close the door again, because I'm unhappy that this door has been opened. And there was nothing on the label that said, you know what, if you take this kind of thing, you're going to experience this particular kind of effect. And a lot of people are saying, which is why the Merry Pranksters, was it the Merry Pranksters? I'm getting my information confused. Timothy Leary. Is it Timothy Leary? Which is why these guys started manufacturing LSD at Harvard University and spreading it as far and wide as they possibly could, because they felt that it would be of benefit to humanity to have these mind-expanding experiences. Might very well be for some people, and a lot of people are saying that it is. But it's dangerous. And then this is where the controversy always comes in with people like me. Why must because I'm the one who has experienced the negative benefits of taking LSD, why must I make it unpleasant for everybody else? I don't want to do that. So my experience is that I don't think expanding your mind in that particular direction is such a great thing. And once you open that door, you can't close it again. So my quest has been to try and find out, how do I close that door? How do I experience soundness of mind again? And this has been a 22-year quest, the 22-year quest of my recovery. So in the early stages of my recovery, when I first put the drugs down, in that first 6 months when I first stopped drinking, I felt a tremendous amount of relief, huge amount of relief. I remember sitting in a meeting at one stage in a hall, in an empty hall. I got there early, nobody was there, and it was quiet. And I was just able to sit there in the quiet, and I didn't have to rush off anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. I was just able to just be there. And then the normal thing that happens is life picks up speed and it gains momentum. And to make that experience a working part of my life has been what I have tried to the very best of my ability to do. Again, to shut the door. I know Jim Morrison named his band the Doors of Perception. Open the doors of perception, which is, The Doors of Perception is a book written by Aldous Huxley, who was a great proponent of LSD, and on his deathbed took LSD so that he could have a mind-expanding experience as his soul left his body, or however you want to view that particular thing. So then, if I follow which I have done, if I follow the outlines of the 12 steps, if I do exactly what the 12 steps, I will gain a level of freedom, and I will gain a level of peace from my past and from myself. But there are two definite levels of looking at that. You can follow the ideology, which is purely the words on the page, or you can look at the intention, which is where the spiritual angle comes into question. So I have followed the ideology of the 12 steps. And where that took me, it took me to a place of burnout. Just doing it exactly as it says on the words on the page. So the way that I practiced it, I'll explain it to you. Step one, nobody needed to explain step one to me. I immediately knew and understood what step one was. I thought, as part of step two and step three, that if I go to church that will be enough. I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to a power greater than myself. I'll go to church. And I went to church for many, many years. I stayed sober. I did the inventories. I made the amends. I tried the prayer. Didn't try the meditation. And I helped other people. I became of service in this program. And I did that consistently. Did step 10s, which is on an ongoing basis, taking inventory and making right as I was going along. I stayed sober, but I burned out very, very, very badly. And I burned out going to meetings, working a program with a sponsor, a psychologist that I was seeing, and a recovery coach that I was seeing. So I had everything in place. Everything. If you had to look at the way that I was doing it from the outside, I was doing it 100% perfectly like I was supposed to, like it had been outlined in the text. So why did I burn out? So when I burned out, I became suicidal. I was having panic attacks all the time. I had to stop working. I couldn't work anymore because I was so stressed out. I wasn't sleeping. I was sleeping 2 hours a day, and I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine living my life the way that I was experiencing it in that moment for the rest of my life. And it was almost like a case of, I can't kill myself. It would be too devastating to my family to do that. I can't drink because I had such an overwhelming desire and such intense, phenomenally intense cravings to drink. I can't drink because, I own a treatment center. I'm helping people to recover. I've been in recovery for such a long time. I don't want to drink because I know drinking is not going to close that door, because drinking is the thing that opened that door. Drinking and using was the thing that opened that door and kept that door open. So I knew that wasn't the solution. Couldn't kill myself. Couldn't drink and use. Was doing everything exactly the way that it was outlined there, but my life was a total catastrophe. Total catastrophe. And that was because I misunderstood step 3. Not step 2. Because step 2 says to us, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I had experienced already, just through the fact of cleaning up my act and doing the things the way that they say in the program, a level of sanity. And that is where I got exposed to, and the first book that I read was The 4 Agreements. The Four Agreements was terrible for me to read. Absolutely, such a short book. Challenged my absolute core, fundamental beliefs, which are, if you are a good person who has good Christian values, you may not look at other books that do not speak about Christianity, because you will burn in the eternal pit of flames. You will open yourself up to demon possessions, and you are done for. I promise you, this is what I believed. So I had heard the Christian message growing up, and quite possibly that there was an element of brainwashing that was taking place, and a lot of people that I speak to have experienced the exact same thing. But Dominic, the addict, listened to those words and those messages that was being said and interpreted them in a very particular way inside of myself that held me prisoner. So reading about the space in between spaces and all the stuff that he talks about in the 4 Agreements, it was horrendous. So when I work with people, I make them all read the 4 Agreements. And I ask them to read the 4 Agreements, not because I think that there's anything spectacular in the book. I think it's a great book, but I want to see if the person is able to read that text without losing their mind. That's the purpose of. And if the person is able to do that, then it shows a little bit of willingness to explore and look at ideas, which I was unable to because of the way that I had interpreted the Christian message and the indoctrination and the way that I was raised, all of those things. The next book that I read was a book called There's a Spiritual Solution to Every Problem by Wayne Dyer. And this is all around step 3, my understanding of step 3 and what I believe. So if we're talking about a restoration to sanity, I believe that to a degree it can be said that what I was looking at is I was looking at the mastery of it. I was tired of the misunderstanding and the confusion. I wanted to find out, because nobody was coming to me and saying, listen, buddy, this is what you need to do. Nobody came to me and said, this is what I need to do. I have to figure it out for myself. And there was no structure for me to follow. The 12 steps was there. The ideology was there. The system was there. I'd followed it. But I didn't have that deeper understanding of what the message was about. And what Wayne Dyer did in his book that was so phenomenal for me was he compared Christian language with Eastern philosophy language. That's all that he did. The exact same ideas using different words. And I was able to untangle, to start the very basics of untangling the confusion and the mess and the misunderstanding of what was going on in my mind. The book that I read after that was Eckhart Tolle, and he did exactly the same thing, The Power of Now. Power of Now. So these books that I'm talking about now are, there was an old advert on television, an exclusive book advert. If you could pass down one book to future generations, what book would it be? And that question puzzled me forever, because I believe that the greatest book that I ever read was The Lord of the Rings. I read it when I was in standard 4. It was an amazing book. But thinking about it now, I also believe that I was at a time in my life, I was 40 when all of this happened, that I had become receptive to learning something new, because nobody could tell me anything. I knew all about what the church said. I knew all about what the 12 steps said. I was unteachable. If somebody said to me, you need to do spirituality this way, I'd say, no, you need to do spirituality this way. So I read Eckhart Tolle's book, and I think I'm just trying to remember the differentiation between what Wayne Dyer said and what Eckhart Tolle said, because Eckhart Tolle went quite a long ways of comparing the two philosophies and showing how similar they are. Wayne Dyer spoke a lot about just spirituality that made so much sense for me. It was such a good foundation for having a look at The Power of Now. And The Power of Now was a very, very difficult book for me to read. I would read a paragraph. I would start at the start of the paragraph, and I would read the paragraph, and by the time I got to the end of the paragraph, I wouldn't know what the hell I just read. So I had to sit with a pencil and read a sentence and underline a word, and then I would find a word that didn't make sense in the sentence, and I would get a dictionary and I would translate the word. And I went through that whole book, sentence for sentence, and I understood every single thing that he was saying to me. Every single thing that he said in that book. I've made an effort to try and understand. And at the back of that book, he's got a list of resources that he used to put that book together. And one of those was Course in Miracles. And that was then a 4.5-year journey. Now, I'm describing to you a period of maybe 6 months, approximately, of getting into spiritual recovery. And I remember going and seeing the psychologist that I was seeing, and I was feeling a lot better, but I still wasn't out of the woods. And interestingly, I'd gone onto the internet and looked for answers, and there was nothing. There was a lot of fluff. silly articles that people just pump out onto the net. I couldn't find anything of value, and I spoke to people, try to get answers. One of my friends told me that he thinks that I should go onto, but like my philosophy is I don't know where that's going to take me. I don't put drugs in my body. I went and saw the psychologist and I said to her, will I ever be okay again? My question to her. And she said, of course you'll be okay, man. Look how far you've come. And I didn't believe her. Because there's no answer to that question. I was asking her to make me feel okay. I don't feel okay. Make me feel okay. That's what that question is. Will I be okay? Yes, no. And I started working again at about 7 months. And she suggested, I think what you do is, I think you should start doing groups again. Get a nice little group, something that's positive, that can uplift you and make you feel good about yourself. And I went back to the office and spoke to my colleagues, and they made me do concern group for 6 months. And it was the greatest thing that could have happened to me. The greatest thing that could have happened to me. Because the reason I had burned out was because of my people pleasing and my codependency. I couldn't say no to anybody. I didn't have any boundaries. I was working in a treatment center with people that were exactly like me. And I have so much luck, bro, like I get it. But now I had to put down boundaries, and I had to hand out consequences, and I had to confront people. It was no longer a case of, like, good luck with that, you know. And it was so hard for me. It was the hardest thing that I had to face. I was the guy in the group before this point where the counselor in the group used to burn the guys, and then I was the one who used to, like, rescue. I was just used to rescue. And slowly, over a period of time, I've found so many answers. And I go through periods of time where it feels like that door is closed, where I can just be at peace with myself, where I am, doing what I do, how I do it. Is my life perfect? Definitely not. But I will say that I feel more sane than I've ever felt in my life. It's almost like I understand now how things work. But I could only first do it by letting go, by surrendering, by giving up. You know, the reading of that of the 4 agreements. In reading that book, I had to adopt a mindset of, you know what, if bad things are going to happen to me because I'm doing this, you know, either I trust that God is going to take me through this, or He's not there. And the pursuit of that. And I can go anywhere and do anything that I want, when I want, how I want, if I want, under whatever circumstances I want. I'm no longer a prisoner of my own belief systems about how things should be. But it's taken a long time, and there's still times where I will have an old response to something. If I go into, like, in Rosebank, the House of Isis, with all the Egyptianology stuff there, and I mean, they've got so much stuff there. My initial response is I have a reaction, but it's an old reaction, and I don't care anymore. You know, I don't care about those things anymore. I trust God to take me through whatever I need to go through. This all brings me to step 10 and 11, which is really what all of these groups that I've been having have been about. Because as part of the recovery journey, I started meditating. And I spent 4 years studying meditation diligently. Every book that I read, every single day, was to try and understand meditation and what it's about. And then, of course, the practical application of actually meditating, which is really hard. It's one of the hardest disciplines that I've undertaken. I like to read, so for me, reading helps me find my spiritual center, helps me find that balance. And why I say step 10 and 11, because it was only I started working again with a sponsor, doing things differently, not the way that I'd always done them. It was only when I hit step 10 and 11 that I started to understand that I have to take responsibility for my life. But I first had to let go and do that whole house cleaning process before I got to a point where I was able to start taking responsibility. Because if I start taking responsibility from a skewed perspective, what am I taking responsibility for? What am I doing? Is my thinking clear, or is my thinking messed up for the things that I'm trying to do? So when I look at a book like this, after I had read Course in Miracles, interestingly enough, I think this was the next book that I read, Peak. This is the next books that I read. It was about learning how to take responsibility. So I think that in itself is the hardest thing to do, is to be responsible. There's nothing harder than that, especially for somebody like me. Being responsible does not come naturally to me. I don't know if it was genetic or how I was raised. It just doesn't. I never finished high school. My history is littered with not taking responsibility, being stuck in awful jobs that I just am a prisoner in, having no wherewithal or no understanding of how to get myself out of situations because I'm stuck there because I don't know how to take responsibility. I guess the point, and it's definitely something that I learned from this stuff, is if you are struggling to apply yourself to the things that you need to do for your recovery, it can be done. Us as counselors, the best that we can hope to do is to motivate, push, try and force, cajole, whatever trick we can use to get people to do the things that they need to do in recovery for themselves. That's the best that we can hope to do. Because none of the stuff that I'm doing helps anybody except me, except if I share it with you. You have to do the things, you have to walk the path, and you have to walk the journey. And if you don't, you will stay exactly where you are and you will not progress. If the law of entropy is true, then it's much easier for things to fall apart than for things to come together and to rise above. So if you think that, I'm going to just walk out of here and I'm just going to be cool, it doesn't. The law of the universe doesn't work that way. A boiling kettle will always cool down. Things will always revert back to disintegration. So part of what Anders Ericsson talks about here in his book was mental representations. It's something that we touched on a little bit, and something that I wanted to speak about just a little bit. And there was a time that my mom asked me to. Well, she didn't ask me. I volunteered to build a kitchen for her. And she didn't want me to do it because she didn't think I would be able to do it. She wanted to get the kitchen fitters in. Then I told her how much money she could save if I did it for her. I think the kitchen fitters wanted to charge her 50 grand. I said I would do it for 12, which is what I did it for. And I spent a tremendous. It was such a stimulating exercise. I enjoyed it so much. All I thought about was the kitchen. I designed the whole thing myself. I measured it up. I pulled the old kitchen out. Then I had to cut boards, countertops, kitchen sinks. I had to figure out how to put all of the stuff together the way that kitchen fitters do, because I couldn't do a botched job. The countertops had to be level. You know, if you put a pencil on it, that the pencil doesn't roll off the sides. All the door handles, the whole cupboard for the whole kitchen have to be exactly the same length and the same size at the same level. You know, so I drew on years of skill and ability that I had to be able to build and fit that kitchen. And there are people who think that they can do something like that. There are not very many people who can. Now, that whole thing was done in my mind. The planning, the execution, and the completion, and the end result. I thought through this whole procedure. Mental representation is the way that Anders Ericsson is talking about it here in his book. What he's saying is that there isn't a lot of information. People haven't really had a detailed look at these things and how to put these things together. But if you think about anything that you like doing, and any skill that you've applied yourself to, and anything that you've dedicated yourself to, requires a certain amount of commitment. And figuring out ways how to improve what it is that you're doing, and how to get better at what you're doing, so that you can be better at what you're doing. Recovery is such an ephemeral thing. I mean, if I have to compare recovery to doing something fun like playing tennis, you know, if I want to become a better tennis player, or if I want to be better at recovery, it's difficult to join those two things together, because recovery is a different thing. But if I am recovered, and I do want to perform better, and I do want to get better at the things that I do, the things that I enjoy doing, it's interesting to know how these things work. How do I motivate myself to stay engaged and to keep going? What do I need to put in place to make that happen? And I'm going to end with this example. Everybody knows who Benjamin Franklin is, the American president. He was a very, very good writer. And what he did was, he didn't start out as a good writer. He started looking, there was a particular publication that he really liked. And he started looking at the way that the writers in this publication put their articles together, and he started copying what they were doing. And then he started figuring out his own ways to improve on what it was that he was seeing. And he would compare what he was doing and where he would go wrong with the way that they were doing things. And he became a very, very good writer. He trained himself to be a very good writer. Benjamin Franklin loved to play chess, but he was useless at chess. And he never applied the same amount of commitment and diligence, same practice methodology to his chess playing. And it frustrated him to no end that he couldn't play better chess. So anything that you do, you won't get better at it, anything that you do, unless you work at it. Unless you figure out, I had to figure this stuff out by myself. The framework was there, everything was there. The 12 steps was there, it was written out, it was laid out, there were people there who understood it and knew how it worked. I had to do it myself. I had to go through that whole journey myself and educate myself through the whole process. I believe that addiction served absolutely no purpose in my life. Nothing. I cannot say, you know what, because I used drugs, I acquired these fabulous skills that I can use. I don't believe that at all. One thing though is that it has put me in a position where I can share my experience that maybe other people can learn from my experience. That's kind of it. You know, the sum total of all of those years of using.